Hi everyone, welcome back to Ancient History Jewelry Stories. Before we even get into this, and straight off the top, things are going to be a little bit different for this episode. If the audio sounds strange, or you can hear crickets in the background, that is because I am not at home where I usually record. I have been visiting my family out of the country for the last week. Also, I made the rookie mistake of relying on technology and came to the realization while recording this podcast episode that my usual podcast recording app has ceased being functional. So, in the interest of good podcast quality, I'm going to split this into 2 episodes. Also, because things started to go a little off the rails, and this would have ended up being a 50-minute episode, so I thought it was best to give everyone some content for this week and post another episode next week on the last day of the month. We are, of course, continuing this month's deep dive into jewelry as magical symbol. On the last episode, we started this very deep, potentially bottomless dive into the history of jewelry as magical symbol. As with the last few months of podcast episodes, this month is a companion to the video deep dive series, but I've decided I should probably say the video series is a companion to these podcast episodes, since they're getting longer and heftier and are chock full of information. If you haven't listened to part 1 of Jewelry as Magical Symbol, please go back and listen to that one before starting this episode. You'll be kind of confused and missing a lot of context if you start here. Hopefully, you've gone and listened to that episode, so I will spare you the introduction. You should know who I am and what we are doing here by now. If you've listened to the first episode and want some visual references for some of the pieces I discussed, you can check out the last 2 Deep Dive Wednesday videos on my Instagram, TikTok, or YouTube page. If you are a paid Patreon member, you have a poll to decide what you would like this month's bonus episode to be about. There will also be a poll up later in the week to help choose next month's deep dive topic. If you would like to have access to bonus videos and polls, you can join the $5 a month paid tier on Patreon at patreon.com/Ancient History Jewelry Stories. On the last episode, we covered the earliest known jewelry finds, the earliest known gold jewelry, as well as how important jewelry was as a form of devotion and ritual in a few ancient cultures, including the ancient Mesopotamians and ancient Egyptians. We left off at Egyptian amulets, which are probably one of the most recognizable forms of jewelry as magical symbol, and certainly one of the forms that we have the most examples of. Unlike the jewelry worn by the ancient Mesopotamians, all of which was intended to be a part of the ritualistic use of jewelry as a form of worship and divinity, these amulets represent a very recognizable form of symbolic object. As I mentioned, the Egyptians believed that any object could be turned into an amulet via intention and action. Amulets were popular in Egypt through the Ptolemaic and Roman eras, but were also an important and integral part of the everyday life of ancient Greece and, later, Rome. We will get back to that, but for now, we're going to go backwards a little bit to the precursors of what we think of as the classical Greeks, the Minoans. The Minoan civilization, which covered the period from 3100 to 1450 BCE, was most known for their lavish palaces and intricate, vibrant frescoes. Located in Greece and centered in the island of Crete, they were a sophisticated society with a knowledge of plumbing, engineering, and very intricate metalsmithing. Despite being considered the first civilization in Europe, the ancient Minoans are a bit of an enigma. Actually, more than a bit. They are downright mysterious. They developed 2 writing systems. One is known as Cretan hieroglyphs, The other is known as linear A, and neither has been fully deciphered. They built labyrinthine structures, originally assumed to be palaces, but now believed to be places of worship. Because we know so little about ancient Minoan language, religion, society, politics, we have no idea how these labyrinths fit into the grand scheme of things. They had incredibly intricate trade networks, exporting luxury crafts such as pottery, figurines, even their own artisans who traveled as far as Egypt to paint frescoes, as well as agricultural produce, all in exchange for raw metals, especially gold, which came from Egypt. Due to the rarity of gold and the need to import it from a foreign source, it was a luxury reserved only for the wealthy and ruling class. In fact, all metals were rare in Crete, making them a very valuable commodity. While we don't know much about Minoan society, and many aspects of their religious pantheon and day-to-day lives are simply a giant question mark, we do know that the majority of their art focused on the subjects of nature and ritual, with the lines between the two being fairly blurred. We may not have a thorough understanding of their beliefs, but it's fairly clear from the existing Minoan jewelry finds that they were also using jewelry as a form of ritual and magical symbol. One of the most, if not the most, important jewelry finds from the Minoans is known as the Aegina treasure. Said to have been found in a tomb on the island of Aegina in Greece, it's been in the collection of the British Museum since 1892. I think you can understand why I stress that it is said to have been found on the island of Aegina. It's now believed to have come from the Chrysolakos necropolis at Malia, on the northern coast of Crete, a site near an ancient Minoan palace that had been mostly looted by the time Victorian archaeologists got there. Please know that I am putting emphasis on the quotation marks around Victorian archaeologist, and I am giving it some very heavy side eye. Dating to between 1850 and 1550 BCE, which spans a period known as Middle Minoan II and III in most versions of Minoan chronology, it's composed of a pair of earrings, 3 diadems, a pendant, a bracelet, a cup, 4 rings, some ornamented plaques, plain strips, and 5 hoops or rings, all of which were made of gold. The find also contained many beads and pendants made of a variety of stones, including lapis lazuli, amethyst, carnelian, green jasper, and quartz. First, let's focus on the pendant in this hoard, an object that was very clearly symbolic. This piece seems to show some sort of Cretan deity, perhaps a nature god, who has been dubbed the quote-unquote master of animals in modern times. He's shown holding 2 geese by the neck, one on either side of him, with his torso and head facing the viewer, and his legs in a sideways stride, which is a style very common in ancient Egyptian imagery, sometimes referred to as twisted perspective. His legs are flanked by lotus flowers, and behind him are a pair of stylized bull's horns that I think resemble snakes. Suspended from this pendant are 5 gold discs. With the exception of the discs, the entire piece is made from 1 sheet of gold, which has been worked in relief, also known as the technique of repoussé. What's fascinating is not just the fact that this pendant shows what was certainly a very important deity in the Cretan pantheon, but that the style is so heavily influenced by Egypt, speaking to the well-established relationship between the two cultures. This says, to me, that even if we don't know much about the religion of ancient Minoans, we can be fairly certain that there was enough dialogue with the ancient Egyptian world for them to have knowledge of their art, as well as their use of jewelry as magical symbol. The other piece I want to focus on from this hoard, which is actually 2 pieces, is the intricate and elaborate hoop earrings made in the form of a 2-headed snake encircling 2 hounds and 2 monkeys. Hanging from these hoops are alternating discs and owls, with carnelian beads decorating the earrings throughout. These earrings may not show a specific deity, but the choice of animals certainly represented something important. These earrings also display a remarkable amount of Egyptian influence. These earrings may not show a specific deity, but the choice of animals certainly represented something important. These earrings also display a remarkable amount of Egyptian influence. We also know that the owl symbol went on to have a lot of significance to the Greeks and likely already represented something very important to the Minoans. While the pendant and earrings are the most elaborate pieces in this hoard, there are other examples of stylized animals and human faces in other pieces that were found with them. What I find very interesting is that, with the exception of the rings in this find, we can be fairly certain that all of these pieces would have been worn by women, leading to the theory that this type of jewelry as magical symbol would not have been part of the daily life and worship of Minoan men. If these pieces were, in fact, found in Melia on the island of Crete, then they come from the same archaeological source as the famous Melia pendant, perhaps the most recognizable piece of jewelry to come out of ancient Crete. This incredible pendant, discovered in 1930 by French archaeologist Pierre Desmarniers, is made in the shape of two honeybees depositing a drop of honey into a hive. While the image may seem like a straightforward representation of nature, it is very likely a symbol of reverence for honey, which was tremendously important in Minoan culture. One of the few things that we do know about Minoan religion is the offering of honey to the goddess Eleuthia, who, in later Greek versions, was the goddess of childbirth and midwifery, and one of the children of serial philanderer Zeus and his wife Hera. Exactly what she represented to the Minoans is still unclear, though her origin is likely not too far off from how the Greeks presented her. This pendant likely had some sort of connection with the goddess, or, at the very least, Minoan beliefs about the afterlife, as multiple objects found in Minoan tombs represent honey or include honeycomb imagery. Minoans seem to have been fascinated with insects, associating them with renewal and regeneration in much the same way the Egyptians were obsessed with the sun. The very presence of bees in ancient Minoan jewelry is a form of magical symbol. You'll all be pleased to know that this gorgeous and significant treasure is housed exactly where it should be, at the Heraklion Archaeological Museum in Heraklion, Greece. Once again, so much of our knowledge of jewelry from this time period and culture comes from tombs, though the scarcity of gold makes it clear that most of these pieces were likely worn in life and not made only for funerary purposes. The Minoans eventually became, or more likely, were conquered by and assimilated with the Mycenaeans, a civilization that can be considered the first true Greek civilization, covering the time from around 1600 to about 1100 BCE. Their tombs show a diversity of jewelry styles, as well as a wealth of gold, showing that there was now a distinct divide between jewelry as pure adornment and jewelry as magical symbol. Their written script, known as Linear B, is the first written record of the Greek language, and their pantheon of gods already included some familiar figures from the Olympic pantheon, including Poseidon, who seems to have occupied a place of particular importance to the Mycenaeans. One of the more mysterious forms of adornment is the wearing of beads, an aspect of Mycenaean culture that is shrouded in mystery. This is also the period when we first start to see intricate gold funerary diadems in the form of embossed gold sheets, although the figural miniatures that are most associated with later Hellenistic jewelry don't start to pop up quite yet. The most intricate works we have from this period are elaborate seal rings, which seemed to be more of a form of personal identification as opposed to symbolic adornment. After the end of the Mycenaean culture, ancient Greece entered what is referred to as the Greek Dark Ages, a period of roughly 400 years from 1200 to 800 BCE. This term is currently being abandoned, though this period does coincide with societal disruptions in multiple other ancient cultures, including the Hittites of Anatolia and the New Kingdom era of Egypt. There is evidence of widespread famine and depopulation, though the cause is still unclear. It's been argued that the lack of written record from this period doesn't constitute a dark age, but rather a lack of pertinent discoveries. I am inclined to agree. The most significant find we have from this time period that fits into this topic is the burial found at Lefkandi on the island of Euboea. Contains the cremated remains of a man and the intact remains of a woman, and she was covered with a large quantity of gold. One of the pieces she was found with is an elaborate necklace that was made about 200 or 300 years before she was interred, likely from Cyprus or the Near East. The presence of gold adornments in a burial always indicate a symbolic meaning, and the presence of this quote-unquote antique necklace is especially intriguing. It's been speculated that the woman found in this burial may have been a human sacrifice intended to accompany the cremated male, although my thoroughly uninformed and unprofessional opinion is that we don't know enough about the beliefs in this period to make that assertion, and it smacks of the kind of patriarchal thinking that is so limiting in a field like archaeology. In the interest of covering all of the best bits, we're going to jump forward, bypassing the period known as Archaic Greece, because we have very few examples of jewelry from this time, and we're going to go straight to the classical period, which is what most of us would associate with ancient Greece. This period lasted a fairly short time, only around 2 centuries, from the 5th to the 4th centuries BCE. Much of what we associate with ancient Greece in terms of philosophy, mathematics, theater, literature, politics, architecture, all comes from this period. It stands to reason that there would be both a shift and a boom in the use of jewelry as magical symbol. As with many ancient cultures, the majority of what we know about jewelry during this time period in Greece comes from graves and burial mounds, which, as I'm careful to keep reminding everyone, including myself, really colors our perception of how jewelry was actually used in daily life. During this period, up until Alexander the Great's Eastern campaigns, gold was scarce and reserved exclusively for the wealthy. One of my favorite forms of adornment, gold wreaths in the form of foliage, start to pop up in this period. These are one of my absolute favorite things from this time. These wreaths were made in the form of oak, laurel, olive, ivy, and myrtle leaves, sometimes with the addition of flowers, acorns, or little figures, and they were not exclusive to funerary use. They were also awarded to people as prizes, worn in processions, and dedicated to deities at sanctuaries and temples. These intricate works of art carried different meanings depending on the type of leaves they represented. Unfortunately, many of the associations and meanings are lost to time, but we do know that oak leaves were almost always associated with Zeus. There are records of gold wreaths dating back to the 5th century BCE, but we really don't have that many examples that predate the 4th century. After Alexander the Great led his successful military campaign throughout Western and Central Asia, Egypt, and parts of South Asia, there was suddenly a profusion of gold flowing into the Greek world, leading to a massive surge in gold jewelry and adornment. The exclusive luxury of gold jewelry was now accessible to more people in Greek society, and when jewelry is available to the masses, we get access to more examples of how it would have been used in ritual and belief. Just as an aside, in case you want to feel like you haven't accomplished enough on this earth, Alexander did all of his illustrious deeds before dying at the age of 32. Although, objectively, he was a great military commander, he was an awful human being, which I think people don't talk about enough. None of this can't judge historical figures by modern standards bullshit. He was stubborn and calculating, very likely an alcoholic, and towards the end of his short life, he was a paranoid megalomaniac. He had delusions of grandeur and almost definitely viewed himself as a deity. There are accounts of him having people put to death simply because he was in a foul mood that day. By all accounts, Alexander, like so many Greek men in power, had an affinity for young boys. Please join me in making retching noises. Now that I'm done shit-talking everyone's favorite Macedonian megalomaniac, let's talk about the era immediately succeeding his death, known as the Hellenistic period. Much like earlier periods of Greek history, jewelry was reserved exclusively for women, as it was considered barbaric for men to wear jewelry. This means that, once again, much of what we can glean about jewelry as magical symbol is going to come from the lives and customs of women in ancient Greece. Alexander's conquests expanded the reach of Greece into the furthest corners of Asia Minor, Egypt, India, and the Near East. This resulted in Greek culture being spread in those directions, but also resulted in an influx of new, exotic cultural ideas and styles flowing into Greece. This, coupled with the copious amounts of gold coming from Egypt and West Asia, gave us the intricate and sophisticated jewelry that is so often associated with the Hellenistic world. Entire industries of artists and craftspeople flourished in the following centuries, resulting in new styles and types of jewelry, as well as the incorporation of new beliefs into the tradition of adornment. Much like the ancient Mesopotamians and their belief in jewelry as a form of connection to divinity, the Hellenistic Greeks believed in the relationship between adornment and the goddess Aphrodite, as well as her son Eros. In fact, you will often see them represented together in jewelry. This is when we start to see a profusion of jewelry with miniature figures of gods and goddesses, truly blurring the lines between adornment and worship. During this time, jewelry was often passed down as heirlooms through successive generations, but it was also occasionally dedicated at temples and sanctuaries. Though many of the pieces we know about today were found in tombs and burials, it was not yet entirely common to make pieces specifically for internment, and many of the pieces found would have been worn during life, potentially for a few successive generations. In Hellenistic Greece, it seems to have been understood that all jewelry had the potential to be magical symbol, whether by signifying direct adulation and worship of various deities, or by implying that the wearer held some divine favor with the gods of the Olympic pantheon. I could go on and on and on about my love for figural miniatures, but if you've watched enough of my videos, you already know I am obsessed with all of these intricate, tiny figures of gods and goddesses perched atop and inside of intricate Hellenistic jewels. I feel like the intention of those pieces is pretty straightforward. So instead, let's hop on over to a category of jewelry that was also quite popular in ancient Greece and still continues to be popular throughout the world: protective jewelry. As we've discussed different birthstones for each month, we've talked about some of the beliefs that were associated with them, and we've encountered some beliefs from ancient Greece. Unlike the jewelry depicting deities, these pieces are a little bit less obvious. The choice of gemstones and materials played a huge role in the symbolism and intent behind the jewelry, which is also true for ancient Mesopotamia and Egypt. If you've listened to my episodes about the histories of gold and silver, then you will know that gold was often associated with the sun and silver was associated with the moon. This was definitely also true in Hellenistic Greece. Bronze, iron, and copper were also commonly used for jewelry, each with their own associated beliefs. Bronze was believed to be grounding. Iron was believed to ward off evil spirits and protect the wearer from harm. Copper was believed to be grounding as well and to promote creativity and passion, and everyone's favorite naturally occurring gold alloy, electrum, was believed to have incredibly powerful magical properties, which meant it was often used for religious and ceremonial objects. The colorful gems adorning Greek jewelry carried their own meanings. Amethyst was very highly prized and was believed to be able to prevent drunkenness. It should come as no surprise that it was associated with the god of wine himself, Dionysus. Emeralds were thought to promote fertility and rebirth and were associated with Aphrodite. Garnets were thought to promote health and well-being and were associated with Apollo, the god of healing and medicine. Blue sapphires were believed to have the power to protect against evil and bring good fortune. These qualities have been attributed to multiple blue stones throughout history. They were associated with the Big Daddy himself, Zeus. Topaz, which I assume to mean golden topaz, was thought to enhance mental clarity and promote intelligence, which tied it to the goddess of wisdom, Athena, while turquoise, another blue stone, was thought to bring good luck and protection, and was also associated with Aphrodite. Using these beliefs as a guideline, ancient Greek jewelers and artisans could essentially craft the perfect magical symbol by combining metals and gemstones in just the right way, while still having room for one more layer of meaning by adding symbols. Figures and likenesses of deities and mythological figures is an obvious one, but there were other potent symbols too. One of the most common is the Heracles knot, or knot of Hercules, thought to cure wounds and avert evil, as well as being associated with the bonds of marriage. Another symbol, which you will already be familiar with if you've watched enough of my videos, is that of the serpent. Carried over from ancient Egypt, they were believed to be protective, healing, and to promote fertility. And that is where I'm going to leave this episode, ending on a serpent cliffhanger. When I started this deep dive for this month, I knew it was going to be deep, but I think I genuinely underestimated how much ground we were going to have to cover. Next week, I'm going to try to wrap up this series by diving into a few of the traditions of the ancient Romans, working our way through the Celts, the Vikings, into medieval Europe, and we're definitely also going to touch on some Mesoamerican and Andean cultures and how they use jewelry as magical symbol. If you would like to watch my video series, you can find me on YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok under moonhoney.jewelry. If you would like to see my goldsmithing work and the jewelry that I make, you can find that at shopmoonhoney.com. There is now a small handful of merch available, so if you would like your very own That Asshole Christopher Columbus tote bag, you can head on over to merch.shopmoonhoney.com. If you'd like to join me on Patreon, you can come over to patreon.com/ancient history jewelry stories. You can join the free tier, which makes me very happy, but so far has no benefits. I'm hoping for some Patreon exclusive merch in the future. If you join at the $5 a month paid tier, you can vote on polls to determine what future videos and deep dives are going to be all about. Plus, you get a bonus video every month. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave me a rating and review wherever you are listening to this. If you did not enjoy this episode, again, I implore you, don't tell me. Just go listen to someone else. As always, thank you for being here. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you next week for more ancient history jewelry stories.